All right. Hello again. Welcome everyone to the Lebanon Public Library's series of virtual author visits. Today we have Lisa Black, who is a writer. Hello, Lisa. Um, she has written, I'm sorry, how many books have you written now, Lisa?
I keep losing track. 14, I think, published.
I
Yes.
think I started counting and lost track once it got to double digits. Lisa, will you give a little short introduction to yourself, about yourself, and maybe a little bit about how you started writing? Because you have an interesting, I guess, day job, if you would call it that.
Yes, I'm a full-time latent print examiner and crime scene investigator for a police department here in Florida. I started out in Cleveland. I've been in forensics for 25 years now. And I started at the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was there for 5 years in the trace evidence department. So there I did hairs and fibers and victims' clothing and DNA, mostly lab work. Now down here at the police department, I do mostly fingerprints and crime scene work. We have a lot less homicides than a major city like Cleveland. So most of our job is burglary, but we handle everything. We're a relatively small unit. We handle everything from criminal mischief to homicide. And that's my job. And
Wow.
I started writing actually after let me back up. I have always written since I was a kid, really, but I never thought of doing it for a living, certainly, and never thought of doing it in any serious ways. So I started writing after college when I was a secretary. I was a personnel secretary for 10 years before I got into forensics. And I was sitting in front of a word processor all day, so I thought, well, what the heck, I'll write a novel. How hard can it be? So I wrote 6, and then I got, decided that wasn't working, and neither was being a secretary. So I went back to school, got the degree in biology, specifically to go into forensics, and started working at the coroner's office. Well, then my husband dragged me down here, 1,400 miles away from my job, my friends, my family. So I started writing again just to stay sane. I think it gave me something to focus on. And since I always wanted to write murder mysteries, applying the forensic background to it just made sense. So that's what I've done. And my first book was published in 2005.
So the earlier novels that you had written or tried to write, maybe did you say you finished them or did not finish them?
No, I finished them. I have 6 full-length completed novels
Okay.
that are sitting in the attic and should stay in the attic.
Okay, gotcha. So those were not in the murder mystery or thriller
Yeah.
genre?
Oh, they were murder mysteries, but they were, amateur sleuth kind of thing. One was almost more of a spy story kind of thing. It was, experimenting and growing pains.
Yeah, excellent. So I wanted to talk about that too, because I saw that you had actually republished some earlier books under a different name. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, my first 2 books were published under Elizabeth Becca, which is the name I was born with. That's what it says on my birth certificate. Lisa is a family nickname. That's what I've been called since I was born. And then my first publisher dropped me because I didn't instantly turn into the next Patricia Cornwell, unfortunately, which we were all hoping for, me included. And so then my agent said, told me I should change my name because, oddly, the entertainment industry, which is what publishing is basically, is always looking for the next big thing. It's actually easier to promote a new author than someone who's like more mid-list, as I was. So I changed it to Lisa Black, which is a pseudonym. And so then my next 4 books were with HarperCollins, and then I had 3 with a small British publisher, and then I started this new series that I'm currently writing. I've got 5 books out in that. The 6th book will be out in August, and that's with Kensington Press. Now, also, if you go to my website, you'll see I have 3 self-published books.
Right.
That were books I wrote in between and before, and all these other books that my agent didn't think she could sell. Like one is, what I'm pretty proud of, is the Prague Project, which was actually an idea of my husband's after he watched a special on the Discovery Channel. Long story. And it doesn't fall neatly into any category. It's sort of a spy thriller in a way, but there's no actual official spies in it. And it deals with a terrorist plot, but an FBI agent comes into it at the beginning because of what seems to be a bizarre death. And it didn't fit neatly into any genre, so she didn't think she could sell it. So I self-published it on Amazon. Okay. Just to see what would happen. Yeah. And the result was not much.
That's a very crowded market, I imagine. Yeah. All of the books on Amazon, and self-published and mid-list, middle house. I don't know what the technical terms for the smaller publishers and the big publishers would be, but it's very crowded. I imagine it's tough to stand out there. Do you want?
The whole fiction world is crowded, and that's just the nature of it. But the beauty of it is we have so much choice.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Do you want to introduce some of your different series? Maybe like differentiate the characters or the settings or however they're different. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Well, I really only have 2 main series. Okay. And my prior series was a Teresa McLean series. And she was a forensic scientist at a coroner's office, sounds familiar, in Cleveland. And there were 7 in that novel, in that series. It started with Takeover, which deals with a bank robbery at the Federal Reserve Bank, which, if you know anything about the Federal Reserve Bank, makes no sense because it's it's not a normal bank where you just go in and hold up the tellers. So, of course, the detectives are all like, these guys are either really stupid or really smart, and we're not sure which. And that book I had a lot of fun with because I set it at the Federal Reserve in Cleveland. And there are only 12 of the main ones in the country, and the one in Cleveland was this historic building, and I'm really into architecture, so that was cool. And then I have the detectives hole up at the Cleveland Public Library, which is directly across the street, and that was a lot of fun to write. So anyway, that started the Teresa McLean. But Teresa McLean is she's in her 40s. She has a teenage daughter. She's divorced, and her first cousin is the homicide detective that she works with most often. So I had a lot of fun with that one too. Because I come from a big family, and I have so many first cousins that I thought that was an interesting relationship to explore in a book, which is not something you see very often, because they grew up together but not in the same house. So it's a situation where you know practically everything about a person, but not everything. Mm-hmm. So that added, both tension and relaxation to the relationship. My current series is the Gardner-Renner series with Maggie Gardner, who is a forensic scientist for the Cleveland Police Department instead of the coroner's office, and Jack Renner, who is a homicide detective who has a little bit of his own sideline, taking out the worst of the city's criminals. At least that's what he's doing until Maggie Gardner runs across his trail by following all the little bits and pieces of the trace evidence that he doesn't realize he's leaving behind. So then, of course, she has this dilemma about, should she expose him? Would anyone even believe her? And what happens at the end of the book is she decides to keep his secret because for various reasons, to expose him would be to expose herself as well. So they have this uneasy truce through all these books that they're working together, but always aware that the other person kind of holds the keys to their own destruction. And what do they need to actually do about that? So that's that's the tenuous relationship that's been going on through the past 5 books.
That sounds fantastic. What how do you know? And I don't know. Like a lot of our when we do author visits, people tend. We have a lot of would-be writers in the crowds. They always like to get the mechanics and the nuts and bolts. How do you know when to switch to a different series or when to call an end to a series and go to a different character? Is it an organic thing, or do you actually make a calculated decision?
No, I would say it's pretty organic. How it happened for me was actually I was writing what turned out to be the last book in the Teresa McLean series, in which Teresa comes back from a late night, middle of the night call and to the coroner's office, and she's walking in with armfuls of evidence, and there should be 2 deskmen on duty who are responsible for, receiving and releasing the bodies, etc., and getting their history. And there's always 2 on duty. Well, one is dead. She finds bludgeoned to death in the office there with the word confess written in his blood over his head, and the other one is missing. And I wrote probably a third of this book, and I sent it off to my agent, and she didn't like it. She said, I don't think it's suspenseful enough. And I said, she's creeping around a morgue by herself in the middle of the night looking for a killer who just killed her colleague whose body she just stumbled over. I don't think I can make it more suspenseful than that. I really don't. So in disgust, I threw it aside and I started writing this scene that had been percolating in my brain for a number of years about what if there's a man who takes the worst of the city's criminals, the ones that never get convicted because they never leave enough evidence to even get to trial in the first place. And he doesn't enjoy killing, he doesn't hate them, he knows that they're just a product of their environment. So he sits them down and plies them with their favorite food and drink and listens to them. And then when they're about as relaxed and happy as it's possible for them to get in this world, he puts 3 bullets in the back of their head. Because to him, this is the responsible and humane thing to do. So, and this is all going along, as I said before, very, very nicely until a forensic scientist picks up his trail, and then suddenly you have an immovable object and an irresistible force. So I wrote maybe 3 pages, like the opening sequence of this book, and I sent it off to my agent, and she said, "I love it. Write the rest of it." So I'm like, okay. Except I had no idea what was going to happen in the rest of it. I just, I assumed at some point these 2 characters are going to have to encounter each other, but other than that, I had no plans. So that was how the next series came about.
Okay. And then how did you eventually, well, maybe we won't spoil it. You eventually wrapped up that book that was supposedly not suspenseful enough.
Yes.
And I don't know, I kind of agree with you. I don't know how you could make that even more suspenseful, but you're an amazing author, so you did.
Oh, well, thank you.
So let's see. So do you have anything that you are working on right now? Any new characters, or are you continuing the series?
Well, the 6th book in the Maggie and Jack series will be this August. Okay. And after that, I'm working on something, but my editor hasn't seen it yet.
Is it a new series or a new character?
It may be a new series.
Wow.
It's a bit of a departure. So again, I'm not sure. My agent likes it, but the editor could say, "Nah, I hate this. It's never going to fly." And so you never know. It's a very tenuous business. Right.
That's exciting though. It's do you so I assume that you get a little bit of a thrill when you come up with a brand new idea. Do you get that same thrill when you're coming up with another book in the series of some characters that you have kind of inhabited for a while and that you know quite a bit about?
Yes. Yeah, I do. It's every book starts out with an idea that for some reason I find fascinating, and it's not always the same thing. Sometimes I start out with a character, sometimes I start out with a topic that I tend to find very interesting. And sometimes I just start out with something I want to happen, that I think this would be really cool. Wow, this would be a great scene. And I have to create the whole book around that. So it's different every time. But yes, every book is fascinating to me when I'm sitting down and deciding what's going to happen in it.
Cool. I was going into you have a blog, and there's some postings that you share with the group, the Rogue Women, is that right? Is that the name?
Yes, Rogue Women Writers.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I lose track of how many we are now. I think about 7 thriller writers. Our little motto is kick-ass thriller writers with lives, because we all write thrillers, but of course, there's much more to our lives than just sitting down and writing books. Of course, well, families and travel. We're all like big travelers, so we love to talk about other lands and current events and what's going on in the world and everything. And they're mostly more like spy thriller kind of genres, how it started out. And they asked me to join up last year. So it's a wonderful group. We're very supportive of each other, and we're constantly working on what more can we do to get ourselves out there and get our books out there and support other writers. And we publish a blog. It used to be twice a week. We're just next month going to start going to once a week to give them more time, to build an audience.
Right.
And we're also on, Twitter and Instagram and doing everything we can to discuss different aspects of the writing life and what in our real lives applies to writing stories and how the two worlds mesh.
That sounds like a really good group, very supportive, and so you promote each other's books. Is that part of the process?
Yes. I mean, we function as a group, so we're promoting all our books all the time.
That's really neat. That's really cool.
But we're also exploring the writing world and how we can apply things we've learned to what we're writing and how we can discuss with other writers and readers, and giving readers an insight as to, how we do what we do. And, as I said, we dwell a lot on current events and historical events, and these women are just amazing. They intimidate the heck out of me. We have a former intelligence officer, and we just,
wow.
Yeah, they really are amazing women. So they've got so much experience and so much history that we can talk about.
Do you ever share chapters with the other people in the group before you?
No, not really. It's not that kind of writing group. We don't critique each other's work.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's because I know that some groups form as a sort of an ad hoc kind of workshop, but this isn't that kind of group.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Those are wonderful. For critique partners, I have my 2 sisters.
Oh wow. Okay.
Every time I finish a book, they're the first ones to see it. I share them while I'm working on the second draft. I'm making them read it and get back to me on what they like and what they don't like.
Family can be the best sort of critic sometimes.
Yes.
Sometimes the worst.
Yes. Yeah, true.
But they'll tell you that
they're both big readers, so I trust their judgment.
Right. That's great. Let's see. So you've been published by a couple different houses. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you again, like a lot of people in our audience, they want to write. Is there any? Can you give any advice to people who are submitting things, or to people who are trying to get into the business?
It's it's hard to give advice.
I understand. Yeah.
It'll be hard. Oh, sorry. It'll be hard to tell them anything they haven't probably already heard a million times. And of course, the one thing everybody says is write a good book. And, it's like, great. How do you do that?
Right.
It's about the most unhelpful piece of advice ever, but it's really the only important thing. And the field has changed so much. I mean, when I first started out, I was still going to the library and getting Writer's Digest that's like that thick, and doing it all by paper. Now it's all online. The way I did it is I found an agent first, and that was after 9, I think, full-length completed novels that I had been submitting to agents for years and years. I would send out 10 query letters at a time, because back then we were still doing it all by mail. So having an agent has really worked for me. Other writers will say you don't really need an agent, especially in this day and age. But if you can possibly get one, I would start there. But vet them. It takes a lot of time online. As back when I was a personnel secretary, I got very organized, and I had a 6-page landscape view, single-spaced Excel spreadsheet of agents. And as I said, I'd query 10 at a time, but you check out every single one. Make sure that they have legitimate sales, that they're not charging you for things. A real agent should never charge you for anything until they've sold your work. Oh, okay. Then they'll take their 15%, which is, to me, is worth every penny. And, they might deduct a few things for like copying or things like that. But if there's anyone who's asking up money up front, don't do it.
Right. Go the other way.
Right.
That's interesting. And so, and as far as the difference between, because you've had your toes in both waters, the self-publishing and the being published, what are the main differences between those two worlds, if you could talk about that a little bit?
Well, being traditionally published is a huge advantage in my view, because you have the support of the publisher, who's going to send out review copies, who might run some ads for you, or will might work with bookstores. You don't usually have a problem getting your book into bookstores, whether they buy a couple copies or not, that's another matter. Just because you're traditionally published doesn't mean Barnes & Noble up the street is going to order 10 copies of your book. That's not a guarantee, but it's much more helpful when your books are coming from the usual distributor. So it's wonderful to have that support. But self-publishing can work for a lot of people if you're good at it. If you're good at promotion, if you're good at networking, and you're really great at social media, you might do very well being self-published. I'm not. That to me, plus I'm basically lazy, and that to me just sounds like an intense amount of work. So it depends what's best for you and where your strengths lie.
Yeah. And I think we have heard that from people, and by the way, I agree with you. It sounds like an intense amount of work for me too. If I was a writer, I don't think I would be able to do that very well. And I think there's also with a publishing house, you get all of that, what you kind of talked about, that back end service thing. Like you've got editing, you've got proofreading, you've got, right. These are the things that really make books stand out, or refine the books, I guess.
True. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. The last thing I guess I wanted to talk to you about is again, more of sort of the mechanics. I know we talked about your background and how that sort of informed your writing. Would you say to people who wanted to write, would you say that they should focus on their background or their everyday lives, would you say that's a benefit to them, or would you say that that is just kind of a plus?
Well, that totally depends on what you're writing.
True, true.
You know, they always say write what you know, which can be tremendously helpful because, of course, you know it. And if you're in, you know, no matter what line of work you're in, no matter what you've done with your life, you know details of that that other people may not know. I mean, if you work at a daycare, you probably know a million things I don't know. And that would be, you know, interesting brought out in a book. But on the other hand, you know, you don't have to be a secret agent to write about secret agents. It's so, you know, don't restrict yourself that way either.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for sitting with us. Thank you, Lebanon Public Library and others, patrons, for watching. Stay safe, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.